Some doors are not locked to keep danger out, but to keep the truth from ever being seen. On the very night, the entire kingdom gathered beneath the full moon to celebrate the royal moon gathering. Clara Hawthorne stood alone inside the dusty attic room where she had spent most of her life, listening to distant bells that had never once rung for her. Beyond the narrow window, Mooncrest Kingdom shimmered beneath silver moonlight as elegant carriages rolled toward the royal palace, their lanterns glowing like rivers of golden stars stretching across the hills. Laughter drifted through the crisp autumn air. Music floated from the town square. Families celebrated with hopeful smiles because every noble household believed that tonight the Alpha King might choose the future Luna of the kingdom. Every family except the Hawthorns. Downstairs, servants hurried through polished hallways carrying velvet cloaks, jeweled gloves, and carefully wrapped gifts prepared for the palace. Lady Hawthorne inspected every detail of her eldest daughter Olivia's elegant ivory gown, while Lord Hawthorne reminded everyone that the family's reputation would be judged before the royal court. Not a single person mentioned Clara's name. They never did on nights like this. She quietly stepped closer to the small attic window, pressing one hand against the cool glass as she watched another carriage disappear toward the distant palace resting high above the valley. From there, she could barely make out towers rising beneath the full moon, their silver rooftops glowing with quiet majesty. She had imagined those towers countless times since childhood. She often wondered whether the palace gardens smelled different from the tiny herb garden she secretly cared for behind the estate. She wondered if the chandeliers truly sparkled like stars, or if the musicians really played until sunrise. She wondered what it felt like to walk through a front door instead of watching everyone else leave through it. A heavy key turned inside the lock behind her. Clara closed her eyes for only a moment before the familiar sound ended. Someone had checked once again to make certain she remained exactly where her family wanted her. Hidden, forgotten, safe from curious eyes. She never blamed the old servants who carried out those orders. Most of them offered kind smiles whenever no one else was watching. Some quietly slipped fresh bread or warm tea into her room during long winter evenings. Eleanor, the elderly housekeeper who had cared for Clara since infancy, always whispered the same gentle words before leaving. The moon sees every heart, even when people refuse to. Clara smiled every time she remembered them because they were among the few words that had ever made her feel visible. She picked up the old book resting beside the window, though she could not focus on the pages. Outside, another burst of joyful laughter echoed across the valley. Somewhere beyond those distant lights, young women were stepping into beautiful gowns while parents proudly introduced them to nobles from every territory. Clara gently touched the faded sleeve of her own simple gray dress. It had been mended so many times that she no longer remembered its original color. Yet she carefully kept it clean because Eleanor always reminded her that dignity was never measured by expensive fabric. Downstairs, Olivia's cheerful voice carried through the staircase as she thanked her parents for believing in her. Clara's lips curved into a sincere smile. She truly hoped her sister's evening would be everything she had dreamed about. Envy had never found much room inside Clara's heart. Years of quiet solitude had taught her to treasure simple blessings instead of impossible wishes. She loved early mornings when birds gathered outside her window. She loved the scent of rosemary growing beside the stone wall behind the house. She loved reading stories about brave people who chose kindness even when no one rewarded them for it. Those small joys had slowly become her entire world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before Clara reached the door, it opened just enough for Eleanor to quietly slip inside, carrying a tray with warm vegetable soup and fresh bread. The older woman smiled with familiar tenderness before setting the tray upon the small wooden table. Her eyes lingered on Clara for a long moment, as though searching for the right words. Finally, she reached into her apron and gently placed a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon into Clara's hand. The old metal felt surprisingly warm despite the cool evening air. Clara looked up in confusion. "What is this?" Eleanor's smile grew softer. "It belonged to your grandmother. She asked me to give it to you when the night finally arrived that the world could no longer keep you hidden." Before Clara could ask another question, the distant palace bells rang again, deeper than before, their solemn voices rolling across the moonlit valley. And for reasons she could not explain, The tiny silver pendant resting in her palm began to grow warmer with every passing heartbeat. Clara held the silver pendant in both hands long after Eleanor quietly left the attic room, unable to understand why such a small piece of worn metal suddenly felt more precious than anything she had ever owned. The crescent moon engraved across its surface had been softened by time, and delicate patterns circled its edges with remarkable craftsmanship that no ordinary village jeweler could have created. She gently fastened the pendant around her neck, and the cool silver rested against her skin with surprising comfort, as though it had finally returned to where it had always belonged. Outside, the final carriage carrying her family disappeared down the winding road toward Mooncrest Palace, leaving the old Hawthorne estate wrapped in unusual silence. Clara slowly sat beside the window, watching tiny lanterns flicker across the valley where countless other families celebrated beneath the full moon. She imagined elegant music filling the royal ballroom, polished marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, and hopeful conversations echoing beneath towering ceilings. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to stand among them instead of hidden behind a locked door. The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Dreams that could never come true only made quiet hearts heavier. Instead, Clara reached for the basket of freshly picked herbs resting beside the fireplace. Earlier that afternoon, she had gathered rosemary, mint, lavender, and thyme from the forgotten garden behind the estate. She carefully separated each bundle with practiced hands before hanging them to dry along the wooden beams above her small table. It was simple work, but it brought her peace. Every leaf carried the familiar scent of home, reminding her that beauty often survived in places people overlooked. As she worked, memories quietly returned. She remembered being 7 years old, excitedly running toward the front gate after hearing that traveling musicians had arrived. Before she reached them, her father gently but firmly led her back inside, explaining that guests did not need unnecessary questions. At 10 years old, she watched Olivia attend her first harvest celebration, while Eleanor stayed behind to bake apple bread with her, so she would not feel completely forgotten. At 15, she secretly read books from the estate library after everyone had gone to sleep, because knowledge became the only place where no locked door could follow her. None of those memories carried anger anymore. Time had slowly transformed sadness into quiet acceptance, though somewhere deep inside, she still wondered why she had always been treated like a secret instead of a daughter. The gentle crackling of the fireplace drew her attention back to the present. She poured warm tea into a small ceramic cup and carried it toward the window once more. The full moon now hung high above the valley, larger and brighter than she had ever seen before. Its silver light spilled across rooftops, forests, and distant mountains until even the old stone walls surrounding the Hawthorne estate seemed softer beneath its glow. Clara rested her forehead lightly against the cool glass. "I hope Olivia has the evening she always dreamed about," she whispered to herself. There was no bitterness in her voice, only sincere hope. Kindness had become such a natural part of her heart that even loneliness had never managed to replace it. Suddenly, the silver pendant resting beneath her collar grew warm again. This time the sensation lingered instead of fading. Clara frowned gently and placed her fingertips over the crescent moon. The warmth felt almost like a quiet heartbeat. Before she could make sense of it, distant palace bells rang across the valley once more. Their deep voices carried farther than before, reaching every village, every hill, and every noble estate beneath the moonlit sky. At that exact moment, a cold breeze swept through the slightly opened attic window, carrying with it the fresh scent of cedar forests and mountain air unlike anything she had ever noticed before. Clara closed her eyes as the unfamiliar fragrance lingered around her for only a heartbeat before disappearing into the night. She slowly opened them again, unaware that many miles away inside Mooncrest Palace, another person had paused at precisely the same moment after sensing that very same mysterious presence, and for the first time in many years, destiny had quietly begun moving toward the forgotten girl who believed the world had already chosen to leave her behind. Mooncrest Palace glowed beneath the full moon like a kingdom carved from silver and light. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous grand hall while elegant music drifted through soaring marble columns and towering stained glass windows. Noble families from every territory filled the chamber with polished manners, graceful smiles, and quiet anticipation. Every conversation eventually returned to the same hopeful question. Which young woman would capture the Alpha King's attention before the night was over? Lady Hawthorne walked proudly beside Olivia, greeting influential families with carefully practiced confidence, while Lord Hawthorne accepted respectful bows from neighboring nobles. Their daughter wore an elegant ivory gown decorated with delicate silver embroidery, exactly as her parents had planned for months. Olivia smiled warmly at everyone she met, though somewhere deep inside, she sensed an emptiness she could not explain. She kept thinking about the silent attic room she had left behind and the younger sister she had barely spoken to throughout the years. Before she could lose herself in those thoughts, royal trumpets echoed through the magnificent hall. Every conversation immediately faded into silence. The towering silver doors slowly opened, revealing Alpha King Ethan Blackwood as he entered with calm, measured steps. He wore an elegant black royal coat trimmed with intricate silver designs that reflected the moonlight with quiet brilliance. His neatly styled dark hair framed sharp yet composed features, while his silver eyes calmly observed every corner of the hall without the slightest trace of arrogance. There was strength in the way he carried himself, but it was the quiet confidence of a ruler who never needed to raise his voice. Elder Rowan Ashcroft followed only a few steps behind, carrying several ancient ceremonial scrolls. Ethan acknowledged the assembled families with a respectful nod before taking his place beneath the ancient moon crest carved high into the palace wall. Tradition required each noble family to present their eligible daughters one by one. The ceremony began exactly as it had for generations. Young women introduced themselves with graceful curtsies, speaking about their education, charitable work, musical talents, and hopes for serving the kingdom. Ethan listened carefully to every introduction, offering each family equal courtesy and sincere respect. Yet something remained missing. His expression never changed. His eyes never lingered. Elder Rowan quietly noticed the unusual silence surrounding the king's reactions. After another presentation concluded, he leaned slightly closer. "Your Majesty, is something troubling you?" Ethan continued looking across the hall without answering immediately. His attention drifted beyond the elegant guests, beyond the chandeliers, almost as though he were listening for something no one else could hear. Finally, he spoke in a calm voice. "Someone is absent." Rowan looked around the crowded chamber. "Every invited family has arrived." Ethan slowly shook his head. "Every visible family has arrived." The older advisor studied the king's thoughtful expression but asked nothing further. He had served the royal family long enough to recognize that Ethan never spoke carelessly. Suddenly, a cool breeze slipped through the open palace balcony, carrying with it the fresh scent of cedar forests after autumn rain. Ethan became perfectly still. The fragrance lasted only an instant before fading beneath the perfume and candlelight filling the grand hall, yet his silver eyes narrowed with quiet certainty. It was the same unfamiliar presence he had sensed countless times in distant dreams over the past several years. Gentle, quiet, hidden. Without another word, Ethan stepped away from the ceremonial platform and walked toward the enormous palace windows overlooking the northern valley. Far beyond the glowing city lights, scattered noble estates rested beneath the moonlit hills. Somewhere out there, the mysterious presence lingered just beyond sight. Elder Rowan approached once more. "Does the moon oath guide you again?" Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly. "It has never failed before." He turned back toward the waiting families, his calm voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. "The ceremony will pause." Confused whispers immediately spread among the gathered nobles. Lord Hawthorne felt an uneasy chill settle deep within his chest without understanding why. Ethan raised one hand, and the whispers vanished. "Before this gathering continues," he declared, "I want every invited household verified. Someone who should stand beneath this moon has been kept away." Across the kingdom, inside the quiet attic room where Clara still watched the distant palace through her tiny window, the silver pendant resting against her heart suddenly glowed with a faint warmth once again, as though it had quietly recognized the moment destiny had finally begun searching for the one person everyone else had spent years trying to hide. The announcement spread across Mooncrest Kingdom faster than the palace bells themselves. Royal messengers rode beneath the full moon toward every noble estate, carrying the Alpha King's unexpected command. No invited household was permitted to withhold an eligible daughter from the royal moon gathering, and every family would be verified before the ceremony continued. Inside the Hawthorne estate, the peaceful silence vanished beneath hurried footsteps and anxious voices. Servants rushed through the entrance hall as carriage wheels rolled across the stone courtyard once again. Lord Hawthorne entered the mansion with an expression Clara had never seen before. It was not pride. It was fear. Lady Hawthorne followed closely behind, her elegant appearance no longer as composed as it had been only an hour earlier. Olivia remained unusually quiet, glancing toward the staircase that led to the attic. She knew exactly who the royal order had come for, even if no one dared to say Clara's name aloud. Upstairs, Clara still sat beside the narrow window, gently holding the silver pendant Eleanor had given her. Its warmth had slowly faded, yet an unfamiliar sense of calm remained in its place. She looked toward the moonlit valley, wondering why the palace bells seemed to linger inside her thoughts long after they had fallen silent. Then another sound reached her. Horses stopped outside the estate. Heavy carriage doors opened. Calm voices greeted her father below. Clara slowly stood. A firm knock echoed through the front entrance before the great wooden doors opened. 3 royal envoys wearing deep navy cloaks embroidered with the silver crest of Mooncrest Palace stepped inside. They carried sealed scrolls instead of weapons, their expressions respectful but unwavering. The eldest envoy bowed politely. Lord Hawthorne, by order of Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, we are here to confirm that every invited member of your household has answered the royal summons. Lord Hawthorne forced a courteous smile. My family has fully complied. The envoy carefully unrolled the parchment. Our records indicate 2 eligible daughters within House Hawthorne. Silence settled across the entrance hall. Lady Hawthorne instinctively lowered her eyes. Olivia clasped her hands together, unable to look at either parent. Lord Hawthorne hesitated only briefly before answering. The younger girl has never participated in public ceremonies. She is not prepared for court. The envoy remained perfectly composed. His Majesty's order makes no exception. Another uneasy silence followed. Eleanor quietly stood near the back of the hall, watching with hopeful eyes she struggled to hide. Finally, the envoy spoke again, his voice neither harsh nor gentle, only certain. Every worthy daughter deserves the opportunity to stand beneath the same moon. The Alpha King requests her presence before midnight. Those words echoed through the estate with surprising weight. Lord Hawthorne slowly removed his gloves, realizing that years of carefully hiding his youngest daughter had come to an unexpected end. Upstairs, hurried footsteps climbed toward the attic. Clara turned just as the familiar key entered the lock once more. The door opened, revealing Olivia standing quietly in the doorway. For several moments, neither sister spoke. They had shared the same home for years while living in completely different worlds. Olivia finally stepped inside, her eyes filled with regret. Clara, she said softly, the palace knows about you. Clara looked at her with gentle confusion. How could they? Olivia slowly shook her head. No one knows. But the Alpha King has stopped the ceremony until every family obeys his order. Clara lowered her gaze toward the pendant resting against her collar. Father will never agree. Before Olivia could answer, Eleanor entered carrying a carefully folded bundle wrapped in white linen. She smiled through quiet emotion before placing it into Clara's hands. Your grandmother asked me to protect this until the right night arrived. Clara slowly unfolded the fabric and gasped softly. Inside rested an elegant midnight blue gown embroidered with delicate silver vines that shimmered beneath the candlelight, like moonlight flowing across calm water. Eleanor gently touched the sleeve. She believed there would come a day when hiding would no longer be your destiny. Clara looked between the gown, the glowing pendant, and the worried faces surrounding her. Outside, another royal carriage waited patiently beneath the moon. Somewhere beyond the valley, Ethan Blackwood remained standing inside the grand hall, calmly refusing to continue the ceremony because deep within his heart, he already knew the person he had crossed the kingdom to find was finally on her way. Clara stood before the old mirror in the attic room, hardly recognizing the young woman reflected beneath the soft candlelight. The midnight blue gown fit as though her grandmother had measured it only yesterday, its delicate silver embroidery catching every flicker of light like tiny streams beneath the moon. Eleanor carefully adjusted the final ribbon before stepping back with quiet satisfaction. "Your grandmother always believed this day would come," she whispered. Clara gently touched the fabric, still struggling to understand why a gown hidden for so many years seemed to belong perfectly to this unexpected night. The silver pendant rested against the elegant neckline, warm once again, pulsing softly like a quiet heartbeat that only she could feel. Downstairs, Lord Hawthorne impatiently called for everyone to hurry. His voice no longer carried the confidence of a respected nobleman. Instead, every word revealed the pressure of a man whose carefully guarded secret had finally reached the royal court. Olivia stepped beside Clara and smiled with genuine warmth. "You look beautiful," she said softly. Clara lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by the compliment. "No one has ever said that to me before." Olivia's smile slowly faded into regret. "Then we have all failed you for far too long." Neither sister spoke again as they descended the grand staircase together. Several servants paused in astonishment when Clara entered the entrance hall. Many of them had known her since childhood, yet few had ever seen her wearing anything except simple gray dresses. Eleanor quietly noticed their expressions and smiled to herself. She had always known that kindness possessed a beauty impossible to hide forever. Outside, the royal carriage waited beneath rows of glowing lanterns. The journey toward Mooncrest Palace passed through peaceful villages where families still celebrated beneath the full moon, unaware that the greatest moment of the evening had not yet begun. Clara remained silent throughout the ride, watching forests, rivers, and distant hills pass beyond the carriage window. She had imagined this road countless times, but had never believed she would travel it herself. The closer they came to the palace, the brighter the lights became until the magnificent towers finally rose before them like silver mountains beneath the stars. As the carriage rolled through the enormous palace gates, Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated marble courtyards filled with elegant fountains, flowering gardens, and noble guests waiting patiently for the ceremony to continue. Palace attendants opened the carriage door with practiced grace. Lord Hawthorne stepped down first, followed by Lady Hawthorne and Olivia. Clara hesitated only briefly before placing one careful foot onto the polished stone. Cool evening air carried the scent of cedar and fresh mountain wind, the same mysterious fragrance she had noticed earlier in her attic room. She instinctively touched the pendant resting against her heart. It answered with another gentle warmth. Inside the grand hall, conversations immediately quieted as the Hawthorne family entered together. Curious eyes turned toward the unfamiliar young woman walking quietly behind them. Whispered questions moved through the gathered nobles like ripples across calm water. Some wondered who she was. Others quietly counted the members of House Hawthorne, realizing there had always been another daughter no one had mentioned. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood remained standing beneath the ancient moon crest instead of sitting upon the ceremonial throne. Elder Rowan noticed the Hawthorne family entering and looked toward the king. Ethan had not moved for several minutes, his attention fixed upon the palace entrance as though waiting for a promise only he understood. Then Clara crossed the threshold. The silver pendant beneath her gown became warm enough that she caught her breath. At that exact moment, Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. Across the crowded hall, through rows of nobles, shimmering chandeliers, and towering marble columns, his silver gaze found Clara instantly. He did not glance toward Lord Hawthorne. He did not acknowledge Olivia or the surrounding guests. His attention settled entirely upon the quiet young woman who had spent her life believing she was meant to remain unseen. Every conversation stopped. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Clara felt the weight of countless eyes around her, but only one pair truly mattered. Ethan's expression remained calm, yet something unmistakable changed within his silver eyes. It was not surprise. It was recognition. Without a single word, he stepped away from the ancient throne and began walking directly toward her, leaving the entire grand hall watching in complete silence as destiny quietly closed the final distance between two lives that had been moving toward each other long before either of them had ever known it. The distance between Clara and Ethan seemed impossibly short, Yet every measured step the Alpha King took across the marble floor felt as though it carried the weight of generations. No one in the grand hall dared to interrupt the silence. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead while moonlight poured through towering stained glass windows, illuminating the path between them. Clara instinctively lowered her eyes, uncertain whether she should bow or step aside. She had spent her entire life avoiding attention. Now the attention of an entire kingdom rested upon her shoulders. Ethan stopped only a few feet away. His calm silver eyes studied her without judgment, without pity, and without the curiosity she had learned to fear. Instead, his expression held quiet respect, as though he had finally found someone he had searched for much longer than anyone realized. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Clara slowly lifted her gaze. "Clara Hawthorne, Your Majesty." Ethan repeated her name almost thoughtfully. Clara. The single word carried unexpected warmth, making her wonder why hearing her own name spoken so simply felt entirely different from every time she had heard it before. Elder Rowan quietly stepped closer, his experienced eyes resting upon the silver pendant around Clara's neck. His expression gradually changed from curiosity to unmistakable recognition. "May I see the pendant?" he asked politely. Clara nodded and carefully lifted the small crescent moon into the light. Rowan leaned forward, examining the delicate engravings surrounding its edge. His fingers never touched it, yet his eyes widened ever so slightly. "This craftsmanship belongs to one of the oldest guardian bloodlines," he said softly. A ripple of astonishment spread among the gathered nobles. Lady Hawthorne immediately stepped forward. "It is only an old family heirloom." Rowan calmly shook his head. "No ordinary heirloom bears these ancient markings." Lord Hawthorne's face grew pale. Ethan slowly turned toward him. "Then perhaps you can explain why your younger daughter has never appeared before the royal court." Lord Hawthorne struggled to answer. She preferred a quiet life." Clara gently looked toward her father, surprised by the words. Ethan noticed the hesitation immediately. "Did she choose that life?" he asked calmly. "Or was it chosen for her?" Once again the hall became silent. Lord Hawthorne lowered his eyes, unable to answer. Olivia quietly stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion she carried. "My sister was never given the choice." The confession settled over the room with quiet weight. Clara felt every heartbeat echo inside her chest. She had never imagined anyone in her family would speak on her behalf. Ethan returned his attention to Clara. "Tell me," he said gently, "what do you enjoy when no one asks you to hide?" The unexpected question caught her completely by surprise. No one had ever asked what made her happy. She hesitated before answering honestly. "I enjoy caring for gardens, reading old stories, watching the moon from my window, helping Eleanor whenever she needs me. Those small things have always been enough." A faint smile appeared in Ethan's eyes. Kindness often grows best where no one thinks to look. Elder Rowan looked once more at the pendant before meeting Ethan's gaze. He gave a nearly invisible nod, confirming what the king had already begun to suspect. Ethan slowly stepped even closer, his voice remaining calm enough that every person inside the grand hall leaned forward to hear his next words. "I believe the greatest secret hidden within House Hawthorne was never this pendant," he said. "It was the remarkable woman who has worn it all along." Clara stood quietly beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers, still trying to understand how a single evening had transformed a lifetime of silence into the center of every eye in the kingdom. The words Ethan had spoken lingered in the air, and for the first time she realized that no one was looking at her with embarrassment. They were simply waiting to hear her voice. Ethan remained beside her without rushing the moment. His calm presence carried neither pressure nor expectation. Instead, it offered something Clara had never been given before: the freedom to speak for herself. Elder Rowan folded his hands respectfully and addressed the gathering nobles. "For generations, our traditions have honored courage, wisdom, and integrity. Tonight, before we continue this ceremony, let the young woman whose life has remained hidden tell her own story." Clara looked toward the marble floor for a brief moment before lifting her eyes again. She took a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the silver pendant resting against her heart. "There is not a great story to tell," she began softly. "Most of my days were quiet. I woke before sunrise, cared for the garden behind our estate, helped Eleanor prepare meals, read old books, and watched the changing seasons through my window. I believed that if I stayed where I was told, everyone else would be happier. Her gentle honesty settled over the hall more powerfully than any dramatic speech could have. She continued with the same quiet sincerity. There were days when I wondered why I was different, but I never wanted anyone to carry anger because of me. I hoped that if I could not be part of the celebration, I could at least protect the people I loved from disappointment. Olivia lowered her head as tears quietly filled her eyes. Lady Hawthorne covered her mouth, unable to hide the pain growing across her face. Even Lord Hawthorne seemed unable to look directly at his youngest daughter. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression remaining calm but deeply thoughtful. Clara offered a small smile that surprised even herself. The truth is, I never stopped believing there was kindness somewhere beyond the door that stayed locked for so many years. Eleanor taught me that people can forget someone, but the moon never does. A gentle silence followed. Several nobles quietly exchanged thoughtful glances. Many had arrived expecting a ceremony celebrating beauty and prestige. Instead, they had found themselves listening to a young woman whose greatest strength was the kindness she had protected despite years of loneliness. Ethan slowly removed the royal cloak fastened across his shoulders. The deep charcoal fabric shimmered with silver embroidery representing every united pack within the kingdom. Without ceremony or grand display, he stepped closer and gently placed the cloak across Clara's shoulders. The soft fabric settled perfectly over her grandmother's midnight blue gown, and the silver pendant resting beneath it reflected a delicate beam of moonlight. A quiet gasp moved through the grand hall. No one had expected such a simple gesture to carry such profound meaning. Ethan turned toward the assembled families and spoke with calm authority. A kingdom is not strengthened by hiding those who are different. It becomes stronger when every honorable heart is given the opportunity to stand in the light. His silver eyes returned to Clara. No one should spend years believing they must disappear in order to deserve respect. Clara felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be seen exactly as she was, without fear, without shame, and without apology. As the moonlight continued pouring through the towering windows, the ancient markings engraved around the silver pendant softly shimmered once again, and Elder Rowan quietly smiled because he realized the forgotten guardian bloodline had not vanished from history. It had simply waited patiently for the night when truth would finally be welcomed into the light. The quiet shimmer surrounding the ancient pendant slowly faded, but the peace it left behind remained inside the grand hall. No one hurried to break the silence. Noble families who had arrived expecting another formal royal tradition now stood reflecting upon a truth they had never considered before. Clara remained wrapped in the Alpha King's royal cloak, its gentle weight reminding her that dignity could be restored even after years of being forgotten. She looked around the magnificent chamber and realized something extraordinary had changed. The same people she had once feared would reject her now watched her with kindness instead of judgment. Ethan stepped back only slightly, giving Clara the space to stand on her own while making it unmistakably clear that she no longer stood alone. Elder Rowan slowly addressed the gathering with the calm wisdom earned through many decades of service. Every generation believes it understands honor, he said. Yet true honor is revealed by how we treat the quietest voice among us. Tonight we have all witnessed that greatness may grow where no one thinks to look. His words settled gently across the hall. Lord Hawthorne slowly walked toward his youngest daughter, each step carrying the weight of years filled with regret. He stopped before Clara and lowered his head, something no one present had ever expected to see from the proud nobleman. I believed I was protecting our family, he said quietly. Instead, I failed to protect my own daughter. I cannot return the years you lost, Clara, and I know that an apology cannot erase them. But if there is any kindness left for me, I hope one day I may earn the chance to become the father I should have been from the beginning. Clara looked at him for several silent moments. Memories of locked doors, quiet evenings, and lonely celebrations passed gently through her thoughts, but so did memories of Eleanor reminding her that bitterness only built another prison inside the heart. She finally answered with calm honesty. I cannot pretend those years never happened, but I do not want them to decide the rest of my life. If we are given tomorrow, then I would rather spend it building something better than carrying yesterday forever. Tears quietly filled Lady Hawthorne's eyes as she stepped beside her husband. She reached toward Clara with hesitant hands, uncertain whether they would be welcomed. Clara gently accepted the gesture, allowing her mother to hold her hands for the first time in many years. No dramatic speech followed. Their shared silence carried more meaning than words could have expressed. Olivia smiled through tears before embracing her younger sister with quiet gratitude. "I should have walked upstairs far sooner," she whispered. Clara returned the embrace with the same kindness she had always carried. "You are here now." Around them, palace attendants began applauding softly. The gentle applause spread throughout the hall until nobles, advisors, servants, musicians, and honored guests all joined together. It was not loud or triumphant. It was warm, respectful, and filled with sincere admiration. Ethan watched the moment unfold before speaking one final time. A kingdom is remembered not only by the strength of its rulers, but by the compassion of its people. Tonight, every person here has been given the opportunity to choose what kind of future we will build together. Clara slowly lifted her eyes toward the moon shining through the towering palace windows. For years, she had believed the light belonged to everyone except her. Now it rested gently across her face without asking where she had come from or why she had been hidden. The silver pendant reflected the moonlight once more, and Elder Rowan quietly recognized its final message. The ancient guardian bloodline had never been lost. It had simply waited for a heart gentle enough to carry its legacy with humility, forgiveness, and hope. The applause slowly faded into a peaceful silence as the first hint of dawn appeared beyond the eastern mountains. Moonlight gradually surrendered to warm golden sunlight that spilled through the towering windows of Mooncrest Palace, filling the grand hall with a new kind of brightness. Clara stood quietly beside Ethan Blackwood, still wrapped in the royal cloak that rested gently over her grandmother's midnight blue gown. She looked toward the awakening sky and realized that for the first time in her life, she was watching the sunrise without a locked door standing between her and the world. Ethan stepped beside her as palace attendants opened the great balcony doors overlooking the kingdom below. Together they walked onto the ancient stone terrace where cool morning air carried the scent of pine forests, fresh flowers, and distant rivers. The city beneath them slowly came to life as merchants prepared their shops, children laughed in the streets, and the first rays of sunlight painted the rooftops with soft gold. Clara rested one hand upon the silver pendant that had quietly guided her through the longest night of her life. Its warmth had disappeared, but she no longer needed reassurance from an ancient heirloom. She had finally discovered something far more powerful. She knew her own worth. Ethan looked across the peaceful kingdom before turning toward her with a gentle smile. "You once believed the world had forgotten you," he said quietly. Clara nodded before returning his smile. "Now I understand that sometimes hope arrives later than we expect, but it still arrives." Elder Rowan joined them on the balcony, carrying the ancient ceremonial scroll one final time. "Every royal moon gathering ends with a blessing," he said. "Today the blessing belongs not only to one family, but to the entire kingdom." He raised the scroll and spoke with calm conviction. "May every hidden heart find the courage to step into the light. May kindness always speak louder than fear. And may no worthy soul ever again be forgotten because others failed to see their value." Below them, palace bells rang joyfully across Mooncrest Kingdom, carrying the beginning of a new chapter to every village, every forest, and every home beneath the morning sky. Lord and Lady Hawthorne stood together in quiet reflection, no longer focused upon reputation, but upon the daughter they had finally begun to know. Olivia smiled proudly toward Clara, while Eleanor gently wiped away tears of happiness, remembering the promise she had faithfully protected for so many years. Clara looked across the endless horizon and realized that although she could never reclaim the years she had lost, she could choose how the rest of her story would be written. She would no longer measure herself by the opinions of those who failed to understand her. Instead, she would live with the same kindness that had carried her through every lonely season until destiny finally found her. As sunlight illuminated the silver pendant one final time, its ancient markings shimmered softly before becoming still, as though its purpose had finally been fulfilled. The forgotten girl hidden behind an attic door had become a symbol of compassion, forgiveness, and hope for an entire kingdom, proving that true greatness is never determined by appearance, status, or fear, but by the quiet strength of a heart that refuses to stop believing in goodness. If Clara's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, give this story a like, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can change a life. We would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, what moment in Clara's journey moved you the most? And do you believe kindness is the greatest strength anyone can possess?